some topics aren't particularly fun or exciting or interesting. The topics that I talk about really aren't particularly fun or exciting. They just aren't. They're necessary. It's sort of like learning to tie your shoes or put socks on in the morning. It's not something that you think about, but it's something you do have to know, at least on a subconscious level. But unfortunately, a lot of people haven't been taught about, I guess, how money works. You're taught a lot of slogans, you're taught a lot of platitudes, and you're given a lot of information from academics, but you're not given a lot of information from people who've done a lot of this stuff. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're going to jump on a plane and you're going to have somebody fly you around. Well, who would you rather have? A guy who has 10,000 hours of simulator time. He's never flown a plane, but he's got 10,000 hours of simulator time. Or would you rather have a guy who's got 50 hours in a plane, right? He's actually flying it. Well, if you talk to most pilots, myself included, I'm going to choose 50-hour guy. Because, 50-hour guy knows what it's like to catch a thermal. 50-hour guy knows what it's like to take a 60-degree turn on accident. 50-hour guy knows how the plane feels, which is going to be different than what you're going to get in a simulator. Think of it as listening to an academic telling you this stuff versus someone who does this shit on a daily basis. That's the difference. And unfortunately, a lot of these topics aren't fun. Some of them are quite depressing, frankly. It doesn't get to me too much anymore, only because I do see a way out, right? Most people are going to not choose it. It's sad, but it's the truth. That, they'll choose it too late, unfortunately. As with a lot of lessons in life, we learn lessons, unfortunately, too late in some cases. And all you can do is try and pass that knowledge on to someone else. That's all you've got. And, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, right? So that's how I wanted to open this up, because I do see comments periodically and it's boring and depressing. Yeah, it is. It is a boring, depressing set of topics occasionally that we have to go into. But that still means that that doesn't mean that they're not important, right? Like I've said for years, money is the single most important topic that you'll probably ever learn on this planet, on this plane of existence, this shared reality, whatever it is. It's the single most important topic, because it's the topic of energy. You are an energetic being. We are all made of matter and energy, right? And so money is a form of energy. Okay, and I'm not talking about dollars. I mean money itself. Money is a unit of measurement. So that'll segue into today's topic, which I'm gonna, I don't think I'm gonna make as much of a splash as my infamous landlords video that got a lot of attention, but I'm gonna talk about minimum wage. And this is a topic that certainly inflames a lot of people, because, there's a lot of people who pay out wages, employers, myself included, that pay out wages. And of course, we want to get the best deal possible, right? We don't want to pay a lot of money out because it cuts into our profit margins. At the same time, there's also the people that are doing the work, and it's like, you do have to pay them something. Now, you compete for two things in this world, in business. You compete for customers, right? You compete for your customers, but you also compete for your labor. And that's the part that gets forgotten in MBA class, is how to compete for labor, how to get people interested in working for you, and then not browbeating them, but having them be genuinely involved, right? Well, to get somebody who's genuinely involved in your company and who takes it seriously, we know what that takes. It takes money. And it takes the right kind of money to keep people interested. What I mean by the right kind of money, meaning that they can actually use that. Remember, I've said a long time ago, and I've said this repeatedly, men don't work for money in that sense. They work for what the money will buy. And if they're working very hard, they're working full time, or there's only so many hours in a day, right? And if they're working a lot of those hours, they have to be able to buy something with that. They have to be able to exchange that for some kind of lifestyle. And if it's just trying to survive, well, I mean, my God, if you're just trying to survive, you can go on TikTok and watch videos of how to go out in the woods and just survive. I mean, there's tons of videos showing you how to do that out in the woods. Well, men can go do that. Why would they work in your company? Why would they go work at your sweatshop? So they do it because, well, they see the idea of having money, and then they can exchange that in the world for what they want, right? Which is usually to be able to afford families. So there we go. So in the case of wages, what gets forgotten about is the inflation side. This is where I butt heads all the time with the people on the so-called right, or the Mises people, that will say things like, well, there shouldn't be a minimum wage. Like, well, you're right. In an abstract sense, in a world where you have a hard currency, you don't need a minimum wage, because the currency is a hard currency, and you don't have to worry about it being devalued constantly by the government, by the bankers, and by the giant companies that are pushing all of this, right? You don't have to worry about the devaluation of the currency, because your currency is maintaining value. So no, you don't need to have minimum wage. But what about when you have a free-floating fiat shit paper garbage currency like the US dollar? Well, then you have to have a minimum wage. In fact, I would say you need to peg it to actual inflation, real inflation, not CPI. CPI is not a real inflation number. That's a fake number. You have to, real inflation, I mean, on average, if you took it from 1967 forward, if you go by minimum wage, and if you go by the actual inflation from 1967, 68, 69, up into 1971, before the breakdown of Bretton Woods, inflation was like 15% annually, right? If you look at the numbers. Well, and they estimate that real inflation has been somewhere around 14% from the 80s to current. And certainly in the last 10 years, everybody knows what real inflation is, well up over 30, 40% on an annualized basis. And this is, by the way, these are compounding numbers. So let me give you an example of of how this compounding works. If you took just 10% inflation and you averaged it out from 1967 to today, that means minimum wage, which was $1 an hour in 1967, $1 an hour, would be $117 an hour today. I had to do the math twice because I was convinced that was wrong. Actually, I did it 3 times. Then I went back and I added, well, what if it was 11%? It goes to $185 an hour. What if it was 12%? It's like $239. Or I can't remember the exact number. It's over $200 an hour, right? That's how bad the inflation is actually getting. That's why you're seeing lifestyles continue. That's why you have people that are working harder than they've ever worked, making more dollars than they've ever made, and they're going backward faster than they've ever gone. That's why that's happening. So for the minimum wage people out there, I tell people all the time, like, no, minimum wage should be raised. It should be raised, and it should be pegged to inflation, real inflation. The reason you do that is to collapse the dollar, is to get rid of it, is so that way people realize, hey, this is fake. This is all nonsense. This is a garbage currency that it doesn't really have any spending power. It doesn't maintain its spending power, and we shouldn't do this. Exactly. That's why you do that. But there are a lot of people that are malevolent on the grift right, I guess you want to call them that, because I have more of a problem with them than I do the idiots on the left. I mean, I hate to make this stuff a political issue, because it's really not to me, but unfortunately, when you talk about money, you drag politics in right behind it, which is why I have to follow that stuff, even though I actually detest politics. But that's what ends up happening, right? You've got a bunch of people who don't know any better, but then you have people who claim they do know better, but yet then they do the opposite of what would actually be, beneficial for. They do what's beneficial for them. They don't do what's beneficial necessarily for the rest of the country. There's lots of people like that. That's why it doesn't make any difference who you vote for. It will not make any difference who you vote for. It's just not. They're not going to allow it. For a whole bunch of different reasons. That's a whole different video category to go into all that, from the history of, going back into the 1860s and then coming forward. But I'm just telling you, it isn't going to matter. So on the subject of minimum wage, no, you want to have minimum wage increased. And minimum wage should be increased, and I'm not joking, it should be right around, I would say right now, if you were to try and increase minimum wage, it shouldn't be $30 an hour. I keep seeing these weird numbers, $25 and $30 an hour. Dude, it should be about $160. Let's split the difference and call it maybe 10.5% actual inflation. It should be like $160 an hour, and it should be continuing to go up every single year with real inflation. If real inflation is 30%, then you add 30%, you compound it, and that will make people believers, and it will end this nonsense once and for all. So, see you next time.